Coming up next on Headline Humboldt, we interview Humboldt County Grand Jury Foreman John Heckle about a recently issued grand jury report citing wide-ranging problems in the county's Child Welfare Services Department, issues that often lead to increased trauma for both families and county workers. Also, the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors takes new steps to combat teen smoking by establishing a licensing fee on retailers in unincorporated areas. Coming up now on Headline Humboldt. From the top of Humboldt Hill, this is Headline Humboldt. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. For a democracy to function at any level, there has to be a mechanism by which the people, folks like you at home, can make their elected representatives and civil servants accountable. In counties across the state, a system has been set up by which volunteers, people from all walks of life, convene to collect and investigate reports of wrongdoing, inefficiency, ineptitude, and even criminality. That mechanism is the grand jury. Ours here in Humboldt is headed up at the moment by John Heckle, and he's our guest on the show tonight. They investigate a wide variety of issues referred to them by members of the voting public. And through their work, problems that would normally escape notice can be brought to the public's attention and potentially remedied. If there is a flaw in this system, in my opinion, it's the fact that those being investigated have too much latitude in deciding whether to address or remediate the problems cited by the grand jury. This year, the grand jury issued a report that does a deep dive into problems with the County Child Welfare Services Department. The report, entitled Humboldt County Child Welfare Services and the Courts, Late Reports, Dysfunctional Systems, and Traumatized Children, runs to 35 pages and does a remarkably thorough job in diagnosing the problems faced by that department and the kids it's designed to serve. This is not the first report on this subject, and though these problems have long been on the county's radar, a solution seems as far off now as ever. As the report states, low staffing levels create numerous delays in a process that should be as quick as humanly possible. Quote, "These delays create uncertainty, frustration, loss of faith in the system, toxic stress, and ultimately more damage to an already bad situation." We'll be right back with the interview.
Hi, I'm Chef Patty Hinich. It is a pleasure to show you the wonderful food and culture of Mexico all these years. Show your love for public television by becoming a sustaining member of your local public TV station. Watch episodes of Patty's Mexican Table and other favorite shows anytime with Passport on the PBS Video app.
Welcome to the show, John. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
So, your grand jury report is exhaustive in terms of the Child Welfare Services Department. But before we get there, let's address the grand jury a little bit to help educate the public.
Okay.
So, what is the grand jury? And let's just start there.
Okay. That's in Humboldt County. Mm-hmm. It's 19 people that volunteer to be on the grand jury for 1 year. The term is 1 year. They meet regularly. State law, the penal code, mandates a couple of things. Mm-hmm. One is that every year the grand jury needs to investigate one aspect of county government. Okay. That's mandated. So they have to issue and investigate at least one section of county government a year. Then they're also mandated, they have to look at any prison facilities within Humboldt County. And in Humboldt County we have one, the camp in southern Humboldt County.
Oh yeah.
The local, our local grand jury has also taken the responsibility over the last 15 years to visit and inspect the Humboldt County Correctional Facility and all other holding facilities and substations in the county. So it's also taken on that responsibility. And then one other little known aspect of the grand jury is that should the Board of Supervisors want to raise their salary, mm-hmm. they can turn that over to the civil grand jury so that the civil grand jury investigates whether or not they should get a raise and then make a recommendation. Interestingly enough, the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors gave themselves a raise a couple of years ago, last year I think it was, and they didn't turn it over to the grand jury. I think they didn't because they didn't know that they could. So Those are the three requirements of the grand jury. Beyond that, it's up to each individual grand jury to decide what they're going to investigate based on complaints that they get, based on interests, based on things that happen in the news.
Yeah. So now, if you get a lot of reports from the public or employees, I mean, people that call in.
Yeah, we get. I would say probably maybe 30, 35 complaints a year for a grand jury that come in. Yeah. All those complaints are looked at, and then some kind of preliminary investigation is done. For instance, the Child Welfare Services report was originally stimulated, set into motion by a complaint. Yeah. Last year, the grand jury also did a report on child welfare services. That was also stimulated by 5 or 6 complaints about what was happening within child welfare services. I just want to, and also, the grand jury doesn't just find fault. It also can investigate areas of county government where people are doing an exemplary job. Yeah. The first report that we did this year was about the election process, and we discovered that there is a really great group of volunteers within the county that run our election system, and that the election system in Humboldt County, no matter what you hear about Texas or Florida or anybody else, you can trust our local election system. There's a few things that could be tweaked so that the volunteers have a better time doing it, but it's a system that works, and it's staffed by an incredible group of volunteers. So in that way, we can complement those volunteers. We can point out the good things, the things that work. We can also do that.
And that's valuable for a number of reasons, not least of which is dispelling any misinformation that might be in the echo chamber.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now, real quick, I mean, this is something that a lot of people bring up. There's confusion between grand juries, right? There's the civil grand jury, and then there's also a criminal grand jury.
Right.
They're not the same thing, right?
No, they're not the same thing. What gets the publicity, of course, in the country are criminal grand juries on the East Coast in New York in relationship to our current political situation.
Absolutely.
There's all that press about, right?
Yeah.
California has a really unique system. When you were talking earlier about democracy and all that stuff, well, when California became a state in 1850, it included in the Constitution of California that every county would have a civil grand jury. And the purpose of that civil grand jury, counties are just an extension of state government, right? The funds come from Sacramento, they're sent to our region, so we have to have some kind of governmental setup to check into those funds, to distribute those funds.
Yeah.
When they set that up, they also set up a watchdog system to make sure that there's a group of citizens that are looking into how local county government is operating with those state funds to make sure that it's all working properly.
Excellent. Some foresight.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. It's unique. There are only 2 other states in the United States that have anything close to the incredible civil grand jury system in California.
Amazing. Now, the people on the jury are volunteers, right?
Yeah, they're volunteers. They do get reimbursed for mileage in terms of when they go do interviews or they come together to meet, so that they get reimbursed for that, and they get a small stipend of like $125 a month. Yeah,
but I mean, the hours that you put into the work, I'm sure, more than make up for what little bit you guys get.
Yeah, absolutely.
What kind of, I mean, is it largely retirees? Does it take so much time? Or
well,
is it all
I don't know whether you read senior news or not. But
do
you do?
Sometimes.
Did you read my article this month?
I don't think so.
Okay,
sorry.
In this month's senior news, a plug. I wrote an article that asked for volunteers for next year's grand jury, and that talked about the idea of grand juries, civil grand juries, actually being a kind of a council of elders, right? Yeah. Because the work is done during the day, mostly by people who are retired, who don't have to be at a job from 8 to 5, right? Yeah. So the average age of grand juries tends to be in the upper 60s and the mid 60s, right? Yeah. So it really is a kind of council of elders looking at what's happening and then making recommendations.
Okay.
So you're right about that.
Yeah. Now, like I mentioned, the Child Welfare Services report is exhaustive, and it goes into great depth and detail about the problems facing that department. And one of the things that you talk about is understaffing.
Yeah.
That there's a graph in the document, which maybe we can take up now, that talks about how we were understaffed in 2016, and though they've allocated more positions for that department and they've hired more, they haven't been able to retain them. So now we actually have less than we had in 2016, but way more allocated positions. Is that, I mean, as someone who's been, chronicling this, is that frustrating to you, and what's behind that, do you think?
Well, first of all, that makes me think of, the mouse or the rat that's running in the spinning wheel, right?
Yeah, hamster wheel.
And so if you have a toxic environment, if you have a dysfunctional environment, if you have people that are overworked and who recognize that their staffing allocation is only filled, 60% of the allocated positions are filled, and you bring somebody new into a toxic environment, what are the odds of those people actually staying in relationship to the burnout? So once you create the toxic environment and you invite other people to come in and participate in that toxic environment, it is very similar to the mouse in the wheel, and it just keeps spinning and spinning, and it's self-perpetuating.
Yeah.
The toxicity just continues.
One of the things that you were very careful to point out in your report is that this is not the fault of the individual workers. I mean, and I'll read this quote here. The social workers of CWS demonstrate dedication and passion. People do not get into this line of work for the salary. They get in it wanting to do the right thing and protect children. Their moral values revolve around accomplishing this mission. When circumstances beyond their control violate their moral or ethical code, CWS workers suffer repeated moral injuries. I think that is a very important point to emphasize, that this isn't something that's coming from, ineptitude on the part of the employees.
No, the system, you have dedicated, passionate, educated, well-meaning, hard-working people working in a system that is dysfunctional. It is the way that the system is organized and continues to be organized that is literally churning up individual people, so that more people are taking sick leave, more people are experiencing stress from having to go into those toxic environments every day, and we can't retain people, and people are retiring early, they're quitting, new people stay for a couple of years, they leave. It's the system that has to change. The people are fantastic.
Now, one question I have is that you point out in the report that California is among the 3 highest counties in the state in terms of adverse childhood experiences, which they're figuring out is at the root of addiction and a lot of other issues, and that it perpetuates a cycle of trauma. Is the system responsible for that, or is the system does the
reacting to that?
Yes, exactly right. Which comes
both,
first,
right?
Okay.
I mean, I've lived in Humboldt County for 50 years now, right? And we've gone through all these theories about why is child abuse so high, why is spousal abuse so high, why is addiction so high. People will publish reports on seasonal affective disorder. The long winters that we used to have where you didn't see the sun for 90 days in a row or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of reasons that people speculate about why that is. But we know that that is, and we know that that gets handed down to the children of all that spousal abuse, child abuse, suicide rate, the addiction rate. There are children involved in that, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Those children then become part of a system.
Sure.
The system should not aggravate that or make that situation worse. And currently we have a situation in the county where the system, once the child is in the system actually re-traumatizes the child and makes it worse. Yeah.
And like you were saying before, it traumatizes even the workers who are involved.
Yes.
Because the ineffectiveness has got to be demoralizing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. The county has instituted a quality improvement program, but there seemed to be an issue with who was included on that program.
If you have administrative people creating an improvement plan, or creating, for instance, the other issue that we have is where do complaints go? If complaints within the system from staff people go to the supervisors of those very staff people, the system won't operate. People are not going to complain to their supervisors about those kinds of situations. And an improvement plan that is created solely by the administrators of that system without any outside input, fresh eyes looking at that, people who don't have a vested interest. You're talking about an improvement plan designed by people who have a vested interest, potentially in covering their butt and can potentially, defending a system that is no more defensible. It's not defensible anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, among the recommendations, and you made a lot of them in the report, and I encourage people to read it. They can find it on the county website.
Right.
But what do you think are the most important things that the county needs to do to improve the situation?
The first thing that has to happen is the Board of Supervisors needs to go on record and say there's a problem.
That hasn't happened yet.
That hasn't happened yet.
It's common knowledge that there's a huge problem within that department by the citizenry, but the board hasn't been on record with that.
Yeah. Okay, so we made a whole series of recommendations about looking at different hiring techniques, looking at the hiring season. When can people apply for jobs within CWS? How does CWS relate to Cal State Poly and other institutions in the state of California that are training social workers? Yeah. Can we increase the tuition payback system to recruit people, young people from throughout the state? So we made a number of different recommendations that we hope the Board of Supervisors will look at carefully, and the public needs to know that the reports are a beginning of a dialogue, right? Yeah. It's the start of a conversation between this group of 19 citizens that have investigated all of this stuff. The press, it is really important that in Humboldt County, the press and the media agencies help create that dialogue, right? Yeah. So right now, you're real interested in the topic, and I appreciate that. Well, in 90 days from when CWS report came out, right, and the date is on the copy of the report that you have, 90 days from then, the Board of Supervisors is mandated by the Penal Code. They have to respond. Yeah. They have to go on public record saying we agree or we disagree with these recommendations and these findings, right? Yeah. Where is the press then?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I will promise to follow up on this.
All right.
I will.
90 days. Get me back in here, and we can look at how the Board of Supervisors responded to all the recommendations and all the findings in that report, and we can continue the dialogue. The dialogue has to continue. Yeah. You said earlier, you said one of your potential insights into the shortcomings of the grand jury system is the lack of power.
Yeah.
Okay. Respectfully disagree.
Okay.
I don't want that power.
Gotcha.
I don't want to investigate and discover things about county government and then make recommendations, and the recommendations have to be followed. I don't want that authority. I want the freedom, and the 19 of us want the freedom to investigate, to come up with findings, and make recommendations to people in the good spirit of a recommendation, and trust that they will read and look at those recommendations and consider the possibility of implementing those. I don't want to implement those. I don't want that authority.
Yeah. We've only got a minute left. Time flies, but real quick, you also studied McKinleyville cityhood, right?
Yes, we also just issued a report on the incorporation of McKinleyville, and what we're really urging the Board of Supervisors to do is to fund an initial in-depth analysis of should McKinleyville incorporate, what are the economic impacts of McKinleyville staying unincorporated, and what would the differences be if they incorporated. We don't have that information. That information is not available to anybody who wants to make an intelligent decision about whether or not McKinleyville should incorporate or not. Yeah. And to be clear, the grand jury is not taking a position on that they should or should not incorporate. We're simply saying it's time to have the data in our hands about what the implications are if they incorporate or if they stay unincorporated.
Thank you very much, John. We'll have you back in 90 days.
Okay.
All right.
Promise?
I promise.
Okay.
Absolutely. We'll be right back after this short break.
Kinetic Universe is proud to announce the Kinetic Grand Championship 2023. It all starts Saturday, May 27th and continues through the 29th, beginning at the Arcata Plaza. Make sure to show up early each day of the race for maximum glory. Day 2 water entry takes place at the Samoa Bridge, and the finish line on Day 3 is in Ferndale. This 3-day battle of the arts, engineering, and speed will be broadcast live on KEET TV and streamed online. For more information about the race, go to kineticgrandchampionship.com. The 137th Ferndale Memorial Day celebration is Monday, May 29th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Ferndale veterans, along with other organizations, coordinate a parade beginning at the Veterans Memorial Building. The parade ends at the Ferndale Cemetery for a service and the Honor Guard rifle salute, followed by taps. Please come down to Ferndale to honor the servicemen and women of our armed forces. Tune in to KEET TV for live coverage of the parade beginning at 10 a.m.
As city officials prepare to host a town hall meeting on June 4th to address the city's burgeoning homeless problem, KEET contributor Ryan Hudson brings us this update to her ongoing series, Tents, Trash, and Trauma.
The number of homeless individuals on the streets of Eureka on any given night is estimated to be somewhere between 250 to 500 people, according to data collected by Eureka's Uplift program and the county's biannual point-in-time count, respectively. The city of Eureka has scheduled a town hall event to bridge the gap in conversation. Topics related to healthcare and outreach services are expected to be the focus of the dynamics of homelessness discussion.
That will be June 4th. Doors open at 1. We'll begin at 1:30 to 4:30.
The topic for this time, we're calling it Dynamics of the Unhoused. And we specifically went with the term dynamics because homelessness encompasses so many different pieces.
Right.
Individuals who are experiencing homelessness have medical issues, they have mental health issues, they have substance use issues, they have difficulties getting social services, they have numerous barriers and limitations that don't just span in a single category. So like our last topic was Mental Health 101, and that's very kind of narrow, at least compared to homelessness, right, which is something that includes so many different pieces in the social services field. And so to really account for that, we've actually expanded from 4 to 5 panelists this time around.
Okay. The goal for the town hall is to engage our community. There's a lot of folks out there that are having a really hard time with some of the things in our city, and they don't really have an opportunity to share that anywhere. And so we're hopeful that this is an opportunity not only to educate people on some of the issues that are happening in our city, but also to engage them in a way that they can get their questions answered, that they can, we can work with them. If they want to be a part of the solution, we're happy to do that as well. But just to really have a forum where people are safe and can talk about things that are very difficult.
And, everyone has different ideas, but what struck me was that when I was watching this during the public comment section, the city council and the mayor are not able to respond. And so it seemed like there wasn't a way to resolve or discuss or actually create a discourse around some of these issues.
This June 4th, Dynamics of the Unhoused Town Hall at City Hall in Eureka will host 5 panel members who will be there to speak with the community and offer their individual expertise as it relates to the locally unhoused population and the challenges that come with providing them services and support.
And it is important to have those experts telling us and explaining some of the things that they look at and see every day, because I think there's a lot of misinformation about what's going on or what's not being done or what's being done wrong or those kinds of things. And so it's really good to have these people that are actually experts in our region speaking on these things.
The frustrations that the public are having are some of the same frustrations that the professionals are having. And sometimes it can be really humanizing to learn that a lot of the professionals feel incredibly similar and have very similar frustrations to some of the shortcomings in the system.
Right.
And that we all need to come together as, a community to remedy that.
This is a community issue, and it needs community solutions. And the more people that are willing to pick up an oar, the more people that are willing to get involved, the more people that are willing to understand, and be that person that, like, a healthy community lifts each other up. And so to get involved in that, we need everybody. So, I'm hopeful that a lot of people will show up.
We had such an awful winter last winter. We want to be more prepared for when things get bad next winter. And so, we really wanted to focus on how individuals who are without housing and don't have a place to live, don't have that dedicated space, end up getting barriers put between just basic health care, and really highlighting that, like, how that has to change, how homelessness affects health, but also how health affects homelessness, because it goes the other way in that, folks who are homeless tend to have more substance use issues, tend to have more mental health issues, and tend to have more physical health issues that possibly related to them losing a job, losing housing, domestic violence, right? Trauma, that's a huge one. And so it's this interplay that goes back and forth where, you can almost get into a chicken or the egg conversation, but the fact is that mental health, like all these health issues, contribute to homelessness, and then homelessness exacerbates all of these health issues. And so that's really like the core of what we want. I know there's a long explanation, but that's the core of what we wanted to really kind of touch on. We're not going to solve homelessness this town hall, so we will definitely probably have another town hall on this topic.
For Headline Humboldt, this is Ryan Hudson.
Ryan's article and the full interview can be found at redheadedblackbelt.com. Humboldt County government is cracking down on teen smoking. This week, county supervisors voted to require retailers to obtain a license to sell tobacco outside of cities in unincorporated Humboldt County. License revenue would fund county enforcement of state law prohibiting tobacco sales to customers younger than 21. 2/3 of surveyed 11th graders in Humboldt County report that it's fairly easy to obtain e-cigarette or vape products.
I'm the mother of a teenager. We had a question at Boy Scouts over the weekend as to whether or not a kid had vape stuff in his backpack. Please help us protect our youth.
Retailers will pay a one-time $127 new tobacco license fee and $381 annually for renewal. Licenses will not be issued within 500 feet of a school. The county will also cap the number of licenses allowed using a formula that's tied to the county's population. Retailers would only be allowed to transfer licenses to members of their own family, so a license could expire when such a business is sold.
A lot of these are small business, very small business owners, and not corporate owned. I think they pay 15 cents a cigarette or $3 a pack for taxes now. The small businessman is taking it on the chin right now. I don't know if sales tax dollars are down. We're taxing an industry that is already hurting.
They've been carrying that product for a long time, but we're requiring them to pay a new processing fee that they're not asking for. Don't you think that it would be better if we did this ordinance in line with the cities as well? So then all of Humboldt, we're going to do unincorporated Hydesville, and they're going to drive to Fortuna.
We've presented at almost all of the city councils in incorporated cities in the county, and the feedback we heard from those presentations at those city councils was like, great, let's wait and see what the county does.
The county is the public health department for the county. And the cities rely on us as leaders or retailers to bear some responsibility. They also derive some economic benefit from the selling of these products. They wouldn't do it if it wasn't profitable. And so I think that this is a good compromise.
Supervisors voted unanimously to support the new licensing fee. They're expected to adopt the ordinance in July, and the rules will take effect in August. So that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Remember to tune into KEET TV this weekend to watch live coverage of the kinetic sculpture race. Stay tuned, stay informed.